this is the story of former British Chancellor of the Exchequer, so finance minister, in essence, the second most powerful dude in the country. He was a
Yep.
holdover, let's be honest. Rashid Sunak had been Chancellor, resigned to get rid of Boris Johnson, and Boris put this fucking twat in. Anyway,
Because Nadeem Sahawi blackmailed Boris Johnson by saying, I will publicly quit and denounce you unless you make me Chancellor. And then, like a few days later, he then quit and publicly denounced him anyway. One
yeah,
of the
yeah.
5 Chancellors we've had this year.
Yes, a snake in the grass. A snake in the grass. Although clearly nowhere near as bad in terms of robbing the British people as one of his successors, because this guy only tried to steal 3 million. Fucking Kwarteng destroyed the British economy. So there's bits and pieces. It swings
True,
and roundabouts.
true.
So Nadeem Zahawi, former British Chancellor of the Exchequer, the guy who sets the taxes for everybody else, and was under investigation when he was announced as Chancellor of the
Oh yeah, he
Exchequer.
was, wasn't he?
Yeah, turns out he is now going to be paying £3 million in taxes,
So what
extra
that means,
taxes, unannounced. So basically, he tried to rob £3 million from the British Exchequer and will face no legal charge for it.
just like always, right? If the punishment for the crime is a fine, then what that actually means is that it's illegal if you're rich enough.
Basically, yes, yes. He's going to be paying,
Like,
like I
there's
say,
people who've been sent to prison for like multiple years for like filing taxes incorrectly or some shit, right?
or
And the fact that this guy, literally someone who makes the rules about this stuff, as an ex-chancellor,
yes, and he's basically a fucking fraud.
yeah,
Basically, a big old fraud. Won't go to jail for it though. But if you woe betide you if you put you cross a T wrong or dot an I wrong on an unemployment benefit form,
mm-hmm,
because they will throw the fucking book at you for that. But this guy, no, he's fine. He's fine. It gets even
exactly.
more shady for me because not only was this money paid off to an unknown recipient at first. That's an interesting piece of phrasing. It was worth $20 million, and it was in the company YouGov. That would be the massive polling company who are
Yep,
up the Tories' arse, so to speak.
yep.
Yeah, that's pretty shady. Pretty shady goings on there.
And to explain specifically why they're up the Tories' arse as well, I don't know whether you saw this story, Kev, but it was revealed that there was just basically some random pollster from YouGov just kind of saying this in a kind of blasé fashion a few months back, said, oh, well, actually, no, Nadeem Sahawi came down and then you phoned us and messaged us when we were publishing polls in the run-up to the 2017 election that showed what people perceived to be too higher polling numbers for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, that he asked them to not include them in the results because they all looked like outliers because Jeremy Corbyn couldn't possibly win an election. So Nadeem Sahawi and his friends at YouGov were literally manipulating the public's perception of Jeremy Corbyn by hiding poll results that were claimed to be too favourable for him. A member of the governing party
Yeah,
lying about the opposition at the time.
the levels of corruption involved in this, and this is why the story. I want to put all of these stories sort of together as a kind of through line, because some people think, especially non-British people, think that I go over the top with my criticism of the British elite. Um, they are honestly the most corrupt motherfuckers that exist.
100%, 100%, and
Yeah,
everyone's in on it.
yeah,
Everyone's in on it. The entirety of
absolutely.
the Conservative Party, all of the Labour right, and also all of the media, they're all
Yep,
in on it. They're all part of the big club, and essentially all comes out of the private schools. It all comes out
yeah,
of the private schools in Oxbridge. I mean, think
yep,
of it something crazy like 70% of the prime ministers from the last century have all been president of the Oxford Union or something like that. It's
yeah,
some crazy statistic like that. It's one
yeah.
massive elite club that's all born out of moneyed institutions because England has such a long history of kind of an aristocratic class, and a through line of that, because it's been ages since we've ever been invaded, for example, that all of these institutions are incredibly old. It's all an old boys club. Everybody knows everybody. Everyone wants access. No, there's all this kind of agreement that you don't say. There are certain things that you don't say. And for example, Jeremy Corbyn was outside of that. So the pollsters were happy to knife him in the back. So was his own party, and so was the media, and obviously so were the Conservative Party and every opposition party that basically wasn't the Green Party at the time, and to a lesser
Yeah.
extent the SNP. I mean, I saw this. This got this came to I just posted a TikTok about this today. When you look at the way the media deal with this kind of stuff, specifically with the difference between the Scottish media, who haven't been part of that Westminster elite, and the English media that have. I don't know if you saw this, Kev, but there was this interview between someone from STV and Rishi Sunak, where
Yeah.
he literally just said, "You're not answering the question. You're not answering the question. Like, you're just going to ignore the question." Like, he
Yes.
literally what we would say if we were interviewing Rishi Sunak, and I was like, "Yeah, this is basic journalism, but you don't
Yeah.
get this from Westminster because they're
Nope.
all members of a kind of like a rotisserie of Westminster to pollster to lobbyist to journalist
But that's no,
going
no, no,
roundy round."
no, no, no. That's not true because James O'Brien worked for 2 weeks on a building site. So clearly, clearly that's not true. Clearly, he's just like me and you, basically.
I
Just
missed
an
I missed a step of
ordinary.
I missed a step of the roundabout. Actually, the carousel also includes positions at think tanks, because I think someone like one of the political editor from the Telegraph has now joined a think tank that's affiliated with the Conservative Party, and it's just like, you couldn't make this shit up. You just couldn't
Yeah.
make this shit up.
Well, on that, well, okay. So that's Nadeem Zahawi, right? That's the British establishment are so corrupt that this is a throwaway story at the start. This corruption doesn't even make the fucking podium today.
But if we're going to talk about specifically kind of corruption stories too, before we get on to this particular comment as well, is that we still properly haven't had full scrutiny of the Michelle Mone investigation,
That is
where,
also true. Yeah.
for those who don't know, in mine or Kev's chat, where a conservative peer whose husband donated, I think, was it tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds to the Conservative Party,
Hundreds of thousands, I
hundreds of
believe.
thousands of pounds to the Conservative Party, got given a multi-million pound contract during the pandemic to produce PPE for the NHS that turned out to be faulty when they tried to use it, and so all had to be incinerated.
And yeah, interestingly, guess who got the contract to destroy it? Did you see that revealed this week?
No,
The same company.
the same.
The same company that bought the shit was then paid by the British taxpayer to incinerate it.
This is it's the worst part I actually think about this kind of subcontractor corruption stuff, is that we kind of lose track of the real issue with these policies. And as far as you and I would be concerned, we would both believe that the fault of this problem lies solely with the fact that you're using subcontractors in the first place, because it's so open to corruption. The incentives will incentivize corruption in these particular things, right? But as, for example, all of these scandals come out, because obviously the pandemic was littered with these scandals about poorly sourced PPE or PPE sourced from members of the Conservative Party. Remember that guy who Matt
Oh, we should
Hancock
just
knew from down the pub?
yes, indeed. Well, yeah, they were all fast tracked on that. She just explained to Maria it's PPE, so personal protective equipment like masks and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly,
Sorry, go on.
100%.
Yeah. So
But
yeah. The then health secretary, his mate down the pub, basically was given millions of pounds of British taxpayers' money
yeah,
and did nothing. Like it's comical levels of corruption.
yeah, it literally, I think, like sons of Conservative peers just creating companies out of thin air that just essentially bought bad PPE like from China, and then just said, "There you go," and that's all they did. They were just essentially just a procurement company, just created out of thin air and given billions
But
of
honestly,
pounds worth
nothing.
of taxpayers' money.
Still, nothing will ever beat the ferry company hired that had no ferries.
Ferries, yeah, by failing
Genius.
Grayling. But the thing is that because all of these scandals have happened, especially liberals, for example, or the politically, who don't pay much attention, for example, will think that the problem is just bad people doing the procurement or the bad people giving contracts to their mates, rather than properly scrutinising the fact that this subcontraction in the first place that's where the root of the problem is. We just have to do things within the state, have state-owned enterprises that do these things,
Yeah,
rather than
in-house.
leave
Yeah,
the door open for corruption, which what happens when you
indeed.
get these private subcontractors, as well as the fact that you're also paying for all of the service and all of the overheads, as well as the profit margins of the subcontractor too. So it's worse value with a worse service and more open to corruption.
Yeah. So you mentioned briefly a second ago that we hadn't been invaded for a very long time. Well, I know one person who would contest that particular description. That would be the rather, let's say, fascist bitch person who is the current Home Secretary, Sue Ellen, or to give her actual name, Sue Ellen, Braverman, or
Don't
Braverman
call
if
her
you
a
want
bitch.
to.
That's a, that I like dogs. And I think Suella probably falls beneath that in my estimations.
Okay, I'll say it again. Fascist prick.
Yeah,
There
you
we
go.
go.
There you
Right.
go.
Thank you. Anyway, she
Like
was,
just kind of a vaguely humanoid shaped thing.
yeah, yeah, a conglomeration of bits of human.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, she has said in the past that Britain has faced an quote unquote invasion by immigrants, etc., etc., and has been accused, I think quite rightly by some people, of sounding like the aforementioned fascist prick. She was confronted this week by a child survivor of the Holocaust, the literal capital H Holocaust, the OG Nazi Holocaust, that
Yeah.
thing,
The whole,
and
mass extermination of
yeah, 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 yeah.
primarily Jewish people, but also other minority groups as well.
Yeah, and the interaction was eye-opening. I feel.
Quite.
I am a child survivor of the Holocaust. In 1943, I was forced to flee my birthplace in Belgium, went across war-torn Europe and dangerous seas until I finally was able to come to the UK in 1947. Now, when
Now
I
that's an interesting story in of itself. Although, be it that she came in 1947, wasn't it? She said so. That would be after the war, because of course there was a thing during the war, indeed before the war, called the Kinder Transport, which people may or may not have heard of, which was for largely Jewish, although not exclusively so, children from war-torn Europe and pre-war-torn Europe to escape to Britain to be saved. Essentially, a kind of Noah's Ark, but for children, in essence, and they're allowed to come in. And it saved undoubtedly thousands of lives. One of those lives was a guy called Alf Dobbs, who was, I believe, a Czech person by birth. I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, Jewish guy. Went on to be an MP for many years. There's a fantastic interaction in a book I read by John O'Farrell, in which, as the Shadow Health Secretary during the 1980s, during the AIDS crisis, he came into his staff one day and said, "Look, we need a fancy way of saying you can't stop people fucking. That's our policy." Literally true, because the Tories were trying to do like basically don't fuck kids. The kids stop fucking, and AIDS won't happen, and that was obviously silly. Anyway, so
Yeah,
good,
quite.
generally a good dude with his head screwed on. Became a member of the House of Lords, as a lot of old people do, because that's basically where people go to die.
Yeah,
Um,
especially if you're mates with someone, yeah, or you've given them a lot of money. In the case
yeah,
of basically every political party at this point, like I love how
yeah,
we had a cash for honest scandal. It was a scandal in the mid 2000s when people were essentially um, buying access to the House of Lords, and now it just happens anyway, and people are just like,
yeah,
that's just how it works now.
indeed.
Love it.
So Alf Dobbs, one of the grateful and proud recipients of the care of the Kinder Transport, would undoubtedly have probably gone to one of the camps of the Holocaust, as indeed most of his family did, unfortunately, because they were unable to escape.
Mm.
He wanted to institute a very similar program today for people in places like war-torn Libya, war-torn Syria, etc., etc. You'll notice Alf Dobbs is a white man. The people he wanted to help were not. It's interesting that
Mm.
people are very proud to have brought in those white people, not so much to bring in the brown people today. He wanted to introduce that. And the Conservative government said, fuck you, we're not going to do that. So they looked into the eyes of a Holocaust survivor who'd only survived because of the Kinder Transport, who wanted to offer that same thing to allow the ladder behind him to remain so that others could survive. And the Tories pulled that ladder off. The
Jesus,
levels of
that's
evil you have to
grotesque.
engage in for that
Like
is pretty disgusting.
you literally can't make this shit up. They are.
Yeah.
It's just the levels of depravity that they will reach. Or like it never ceases to shock me. I shouldn't be shocked because it's the Conservative Party, but
Mm.
they continually kind of outdo themselves. It's also worth noting too, if we're going to make these parallels too, right? When you think when we were speaking about kind of the interactions between the media and press establishment with the political establishment in this country, and you've got to think that the same papers that were praising the black shirts and literally using the words that Sue Ellen was using, and she's rightly been castigated for using them by this Holocaust survivor. The
Mm.
press were using at the time to describe Jewish refugees during during the Second World War. And also remember, you also got to remember this is also in the context of, remember Nigel Farage standing in front of the breaking point a
Yes,
billboard, which literally
yeah.
looked like a Nazi era billboard. Like,
It was almost exactly that. Yeah, one of the shots from I believe a film called The Eternal Jew, made by the no, it wasn't a Riefenstahl film, was it? It might have been a Stryker effort. Anyway, regardless, yes, it was basically the same. And then that was on the very same day that, of course, a racist idiot killed a British member of the House of Commons, a member of Parliament,
yeah,
on that day, if
Jesus.
you recall that.
We really have been living through some pretty crazy times, haven't we?
Pretty mad shit. Some Nazi-esque stuff, which doesn't get less Nazi as we go through these stories. Just to give you
No,
a heads
quite.
up.
Point.
Anyway, so from Alf Dobbs, one Holocaust survivor in Britain, to this incredibly powerful speech from this woman.
I hear you using words against refugees like swarms and an invasion. I am reminded of the language used to dehumanize and justify the murder of my family and millions others. Why do you find the need to use that kind of language?
I won't apologise for the language that I use to demonstrate the scale of the problem. But we mustn't shy away from saying there is a problem. I will not shy away from saying we have a problem with people exploiting that generosity, breaking our rules and undermining our system.
I am a child.
So
Unreal. Unreal.
Again, to look into the eyes of a Holocaust survivor who's calling you out on that shit and just be like, no, fuck you, bitch. I don't care. It is pretty sickening. It's pretty sickening. Unfortunately, they somehow managed to make it worse, right? By, I'm gonna have to fucking change the screen over again. By where is it? Boom. The Home Office, the department for which Suella Braverman is the head, literally tried to force the charity that posted that clip to take it down.
Literally, the first time ever someone has like tweeted out a thing and saying they don't want you to see, they're trying to delete this footage. First time ever that's 100% been true.
Yeah.
The Home Office tweeted it out as well. The Home Office had a tweet thread where they say essentially what the Conservatives have done for the last 3 years, where whenever anyone disagrees with, whenever anyone actually not even disagrees with, anyone makes empirical claims that make the Conservatives look bad, they just say we disagree with the fact, which is basically, there's no different to what Trump was saying in his press department about fake news, right? It's literally the same thing, the alternative facts. It's identical in everything other than the verbiage that was being used, right?
Yeah, they literally tried to silence a Holocaust survivor because it made Suella Braverman look like the cruel fuckhead that she is.
Yeah.
I don't know that it gets a great deal lower than this, in all honesty.
I
mean, other than arresting her for daring to do it or something, it's just the optics of it, and indeed the the kind of I don't know, the rights-based morality of it are despicable. It offends me on just about every fucking level.
And the crazy part is that there were like loads of people still defending her. I think the notorious James O'Brien literally spent his entire morning debating people on whether or not that she was correct to use this language. I'm just like, this is we're living through like the end times. This is how the 1930s and 40s happened. People just lost their humanity completely.
Hang on. So please tell me James O'Brien was saying she shouldn't have used that language.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But you've heard LBC callers, right? You know how demented these people are.
Oh yeah. I mean, people who honestly shouldn't be free to tie their own shoelaces. So that,
it's amazing. It's amazing to me that they do tie their own shoelaces. Let's be real. Let's be real about this.
There are a lot of. I'm going to guess it. The number of people that phone into LBC and the number of people who phone into LBC who have wiped their ass that day it's probably not the same number.
Yeah, the Venn diagram is pretty weird looking on that one.
Yeah, a bit weird.
I mean,
anyway,
but just like again, this is how people's minds get turned, and they because the dehumanizing language is basically the first part, as the woman stated very clearly in what she said to Sue Ellen just then. Actually, what's also amusing is I just sent you a DM on Twitter.
Okay.
So this isn't the first time that Suella has been essentially been targeted and called out for engaging in the realms of anti-Semitism, in that she's a very famous proponent of the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory. Now, for those who don't know, this goes back to the Judeo-Bolshevism or cultural Bolshevism conspiracy theory that was started by the literal Nazi party
Yeah.
from Germany to essentially say that Jewish academics were essentially...
Would that be the same Nazi party who tried to kill the woman she just told to fuck off?
Yeah, the very
Okay.
same
Oh,
Nazi
that.
party.
Okay.
Yep,
Yeah.
100%,
Okay.
100%. That they were claiming that Jewish academics were trying to spread Bolshevik theory and also degeneracy amongst like the people of the West to try. It's standard Nazi fare, really,
Yeah,
at this point,
yeah.
to be fair. But she literally went on. She's on record as saying that she believes that she thinks that
Yeah.
universities are all trying to spread cultural Marxism, which is that's just the JQ. That's the JQ.
Yeah.
She's JQing, and the tweet I just sent you.
Yeah.
It's
I've
her.
got it here. Yes.
Yeah, it's her being cleared by the board of deputies that she's not anti-Semitic, and I'm like, well, that aged pretty well, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So she
That
says,
aged
"I am
really well."
pleased that the board of deputies of British Jews. How did you get elected to that? Have released the following statement regarding the language I used in a speech last week. The Board of Deputies has met Suella Braverman and had a productive discussion. She is clearly a good friend of the Jewish community." So basically, she went in there and went, "Israel's fucking awesome. Are we all fellow Zionists? Yay!" And and they let her off, basically, because they will let you JQ if you support Israel. They do not
Yeah.
care. We believe she is in no way anti-Semitic, even though she literally just might as well have pissed in the face of a Holocaust survivor,
Yeah.
and did not intentionally use anti-Semitic language. We are sorry to see that the whole matter has caused distress. Imagine that kid gloves compared to the way they savaged Jumbly
Anyone
Crumbles.
on the left, yeah, exactly. From the Jam Man onwards, right? And she was this initial Nazi era conspiracy theories. Like, I don't know how else you could possibly, in any way, interpret her talking about universities infected with cultural Marxism